Mike Clevinger gave a preview of his trade value in his season debut. Let's discuss why it is non-existent next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong White Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown, part of the Fansided Network. You can check out my written content at southsideshowdown.com. Also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Smash that like button. And if you're a traditional podcast listener, follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, leave a 5-star review, as that would be greatly appreciated. So USA Today's baseball insider and unofficial White Sox communications rep, Bob Nightengale, well, he's got an inside with the White Sox, and he always seems to be pretty, factual on the information that he gets from them. He had a small note in his Sunday notebook about some veterans the Sox hope to trade at the deadline, and pitcher Mike Clevinger was one of those players. Well, he made his season debut last night, and it went about as badly as you can think. And I'll discuss why the Sox continue to overvalue him and how he is a symbol of how misguided the Sox front office has been. Then let's jump into the players Nightingale listed and see who might actually bring a good return. And finally, Sun-Times columnist Rick Morrissey had a column hoping the White Sox are historically bad and why we should embrace it. So I'll wrap up the show with how being historically awful has no reward for the White Sox. But this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So Bob Nightingale clearly has an in with the White Sox, whether it's Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, or Chris Getz, or previous White Sox general manager Rick Hahn, or previous White Sox executive VP Kenny Williams, which Bob had a little nugget about what Kenny's up to in that notebook. But in his Sunday notebook, you got to scroll all the way down. He does actually have a nice piece about how Mike Trout is suffering the similar type of fate that Ken Griffey Jr. had towards the end of his career. But if you scroll all the way down, he lists Tommy Pham as being expected to be flipped at the trade deadline, but he also lists that the White Sox are expected to trade starters Eric Fedde, Chris Flexen, Mike Clevinger, reliever Michael Kopech, and DH Eloy Jimenez. Okay. So first, coffee slurp. Yes, I like my morning coffee, as you know. Drinking, for those not watching on YouTube, drinking out of the Chicago Bears mug. But Mike Clevinger's trade value went from 0 to negative after he was terrible in his season debut, as the Sox lost last night 8-2 to the Tampa Bay Rays. Clevinger went 2+ innings, 4 runs, with 3 of them being earned, 6 hits, and 4 walks. His stuff was all over the place. He allowed base runners in pretty much every inning he pitched, and he wasted our time. And I'm going to say it. Him being on the mound is a waste of our time. Nothing is gained when he gets roughed up. If it was Jonathan Cannon, Nick Nastrini, fine. It's part of their development process. But he has no trade value. Heck, he has no value to any team besides the Sox. As again, twice he was available to the open market, and all 29 other teams were like, no. And the new Sox front office, Chris Getz, acting like the old one. He has major character issues and a history of being inconsistent, and yet he's back on the team. Now, granted, they signed him to a $3 million deal with incentives, unlike Rick Hahn, who had to not only jump the market, but probably overpay for him last year. But they have one thing in common. They think way too highly of Mike Clevinger. And I'm talking about, we already know how much of a, let's see, very questionable human being he is. And that's being politely. And I don't think he deserves it. But he's just not that good of a pitcher that the White Sox think he's this. I don't know what Chris gets, and I don't even know what Rick Hahn sees in him. And you could say, well, he was a 2F4 player last year. Okay. He was put on waivers and no team claimed him. No contender. Heck, no team that just needed somebody to eat some innings. And yes, there are salary considerations. I get that. But he's going to be on the IL. He's always had a history of injuries and a history of inconsistency and a history of being a bad teammate and a history of being a bad human being. Although, hey, not being signed during spring training did allow him to say goodbye to his dad. His dad did pass away. And that's all I'm going to say about it because, again, Mike Clevinger, the person, reportedly sounds like somebody you would not invite for Thanksgiving dinner. And you could say, why aren't you going off on him, Todd? Well, I'd rather make a donation to domestic abuse, foundation. I'd rather not be talking about him. And yet he was the story of yesterday's loss. Tampa jumps out to a 4-0 lead. The Sox do cut it to 4-2. Jared Schuster was out there in long relief. He was all right for the first couple of innings that he pitched, but then he gave up 3 runs, and you can't expect him to be out there being perfect. But that's almost what he had to be because of the hole Clevinger put him in, and the White Sox are inconsistent offensively. And again, Clevinger is wasting our time. I don't get why the White Sox keep thinking these veterans that they have are going to yield some sort of trade return like they got last year. And in fact, I want to discuss that. Especially, I want to discuss who's on Bob's list that might actually bring something valuable back to the White Sox next on Locked On White Sox. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Simple and easy, and the chance for some nice winnings is something I can get behind. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePicks entries, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entry today. And with the White Sox struggles to score runs, going with less might not be a bad idea. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. And if you're good at more or less, then this is the app for you because stick to your strengths when you're making selections. And I like easy. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And all right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot Panchico machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. And game on. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And hey, the White Sox play the Tampa Bay Rays tonight at 5:50 p.m. Central. Sox hope to bounce back from last night's loss, catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter, and thank you for making the show your first listen. The White Sox, again, according to Bob Nightengale of USA Today, they're expected to trade starters Tommy Pham, Eric Fedde, Chris Flexen, Mike Clevinger, who we just talked about in the previous segment, Michael Kopech, and DH Eloy Jimenez before the deadline. And again, it makes sense to sell off some prospects. I mean, what this year needs to be is what it should be is you find some veterans, obviously off the scrap heap on minimum deals. You hope they actually have their career season and you flip them. That's how the Cubs got Jake Arrieta. And when I used to work for the Milwaukee Brewers scoreboard, trust me, the first couple of years that I worked there, I lived through it. I watched Ben Grieve get traded because he could still get on base. So typically, though, what these salvageable guys have is usually they're not going to have the highest of trade value unless they're having a career year, but they're still valuable to a contender because maybe they can do something off the bench. Again, a.k.a. Ben Grieve. He could still get on base. Why do you like him so much? He gets on base. But it's not exactly like last trade deadline when the Sox moved Lucas Giolito or Lance Lynn or moving Dylan Cease during spring training. And by the way, he talked lovingly about last season yesterday as the Padres are in town to play the Cubs. Well, actually, he didn't. He said it was bad. But the problem is the veterans the Sox have and what Bob has listed, I don't think it's going to fetch the return that they think. And again, that's why it's been foolish to chase flipping these veterans instead of trying to figure out what you have in some of these young players that can help you out long term. It's a big reason why the White Sox still have single digit wins. It's May 7th. The Sox have 8 wins. Eric Fedde, he's been a stopper in the rotation this year. And other teams did pursue him in the offseason. It's not like Chris Getz just found this salvation project out of the KBO. I believe the Mets were in on him. He's under team control for another season at a very affordable price. So he should have some value. But he just needs to, avoid outings like he had on Sunday. But if he continues to be the very solid pitcher that he is, and he might be the White Sox all-star representative, he's probably your best trade chip. Although Michael Kopech, he's probably the best trade asset as he could be a closer or a 2-inning high-leverage pitcher on a contender. Although, again, he needs to continue to mix in his slider a lot more. He just keeps relying on that four-seam fastball. And that is his best pitch, and you're a reliever. And if you can throw it 100 miles an hour, throw it. But you got to have that secondary pitch. Now, Chris Flexen, again, this is where you've already demoted him to the bullpen and then brought him back. If I'm a GM on the other side of the phone talking to Chris Getz, I'd be like, you've already devalued him. Now, has Chris Flexen had a few, has his outings been a little bit better? Yeah, he had a decent start, too, on his last start. But I would say, too, the White Sox are almost going with a six-man rotation. Now, I know they're going with a six-man rotation partially because they want to preserve Garrett Crochet and get him through the season. But still, you've devalued him. He's making $1.75 million. That shows you already that he did not have a ton of trade value. He didn't even have a ton of value in the open market. Now, could you get something if you can keep him in long relief? Maybe. But right now, and even then, it's probably looking like a player to be named later. Eloy, he's obviously been hitting, he's been hitting well since April 19th. And he's a power bat. And contenders are going to need power bats. Last year, I believe it was the Milwaukee Brewers and a couple other contenders were interested in him. But the problem is injury history, availability. And plus, no team is going to pick up his option. But if he keeps hitting, maybe a team will gamble. And Tommy Pham, again, I know the White Sox have signed him when they should have signed him probably in the offseason if they really wanted him. But they signed him to flip him. But here's the thing. He was traded last year for a 17-year-old prospect. That's what the Diamondbacks gave up to get him. So basically, he was traded for a scratch-off. And I think that's what you're going to get. And there's nothing wrong with getting a young prospect. Usually, if you're getting a 17-year-old that's an international player with high upside. But I really think, this is just my thought, and how they keep and the reason why is because how they keep forcing these veterans down our throat is I really think the Sox think that they're going to get some foundational pieces with these players. When really maybe Eric Fetty could get you a top 10 prospect, maybe. Kopech, maybe. Eloy, And you can say, well, Todd, how do you know this? You're not a GM. Well, one of the things that I do at Southside Showdown is I've been writing about trade packages, and I really like to study past trade markets. And there's not a huge return for guys of these caliber. Unless you package, like if you put Fetty, Jimenez, and Kopech together, yeah, you could probably get something. And that's the other thing. You're probably going to have to package some of these guys together. Like you can't just trade Chris Flexen straight up. But if you gave Fetty, Flexen, and Kopech, are you going to get a top 5 prospect? Are you going to get Edgar Quero or Nick Nastrini or Jordan Leisure? I don't know. And I really have this fear that Chris Getz thinks he is. But he put together this bad team. Speaking of being bad, Chicago Sun-Times columnist Rick Morrissey tells us we should just embrace being bad. Let's discuss why that might not be the case, and that might not be the best case. Next on Locked On White Sox. All right, I have to admit something. I still have not gotten my mother something for Mother's Day. Even worse, I'm probably not going to be able to make the trip down to Johnsburg, Illinois this weekend. But I'm not worried. Why? Well, it's never too late to show Mom your love this Mother's Day with DoorDash. And since I live about an hour away, I think I'm going to use DoorDash to get her a gift because I'm going to surprise mom with flowers, gadgets, and self-care essentials all in one place, delivered right to her door. Get thoughtful gifts she deserves with the convenience you need. Choose same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive to her door with DoorDash. I think I'm going to do that for my mom after I wrap up this show. Order now and get everything you need for Mother's Day on DoorDash. To be use code LOCKEDON MLB to get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, groceries, or retail order on DoorDash. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. And all right, welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, if you've stuck with me this far, appreciate it. Also appreciate you everydayers. Again, hope you've subscribed to YouTube, the YouTube page. Smash that like button or leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, yesterday's game was tough to watch. 8-2 defeat. Tommy Pham hits a home run, 2-run homer. Otherwise, nothing was good from the White Sox, especially Mike Clevinger. But good and Clevinger are two things that really don't go well together. And yes, you can say he was good last season, but he was also hurt. And again, he was available to the open market and nobody wanted him. Speaking of being not good, obviously the Chicago White Sox this year. And Chicago Sun-Times columnist Rick Morrissey had a column yesterday about us needing to embrace the pursuit of being the worst team in baseball, historically. And now, look, I agree with his premise on one end that all you can do is laugh. I mean, really it is. Most of the time, all you can do is laugh. I mean, I've labeled the White Sox the unofficial get-right team of Major League Baseball, unless you're the St. Louis Cardinals. Then you're the official get-right team for the Chicago White Sox. But Morrissey cites one of the reasons why we should embrace being historically bad. You know, you and I, why should we embrace it? I picked this one out of his column. Again, it's up on the Chicago Sun-Times website. Quote, it's one of life's inexplicable truths that sometimes feeling bad feels good. Sometimes it's better to be remembered than forgotten. Outside of some Tiger fans with an unnatural attachment to misery, no one remembers the 2003 Detroit team that went 43-119. People still talk about Casey Stengel's 120-loss Mets team, the high water mark for terrible. In terms of lasting significance, historically bad beats almost historically bad every time. Historically bad beats almost historically bad every time. Let's keep your eye on the prize, folks. End quote. Now, no disrespect to Rick Morrissey, but I'm just going to say, I don't know why some newspapers still employ columnists. I mean, basically, a columnist in the day, he's a talented writer, but if you want an opinion now, you can get it almost everywhere. Beat writers, yeah, you still need because they can access the clubhouse, and major league teams are still looking for that, credentials behind an organization before they say, yeah, come on into our clubhouse. But the thing that Morrissey neglected is the Mets ended the decade with a World Series win. And Casey Stengel was a great personality, the amazing Mets with his humor and sarcasm. Pedro Grifol, I think, is a robot. There's no human moments about him. Also, the Sox turning things around quickly and maybe winning a World Series by the end of the decade has a very razor-thin path. One of the small silver linings is they have the chance to have a young, talented, controllable starting rotation. but they also need to avoid injuries and developmental issues, and that's really hard to do. Also, the White Sox will not end up with the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft. They will not have a chance to draft a difference-making prospect. Instead, because of the rules, they will draft as high as 10 or I think 11 in next year's draft. And can you find a good prospect? Sure, but you're going to have to rely on your scouting for that. And have the Sox drafted better under the most current amateur scouting director? Sure, because one of the reasons why they've become this bad is the previous guy was terrible at drafting. But again, we still don't know if he's, I think it's Nick Shirley, or was it Nick? You know what? I'm sorry, I did not write the guy's name down. But the current amateur scouting director, Garrett Crochet right now is the only evidence we have so far. Colson Montgomery, Noah Schultz, they're on their way. But still, we don't have a full, this is the guy that's going to draft the next great team. I remember, 1989, or was it 80? Yeah, the Sox were awful, but they had a string of drafts: Jack McDowell, Robin Ventura, Frank Thomas, Alex Fernandez. And in 1993, they were contending for a World Series. That's the thing. And yes, it was 7 years later for the Mets, but they still won a World Series. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. They were also an expansion team. Sox have been around now for 124 years, and they're off to the worst start in franchise history. This type of bad has never been seen. That's why a lot of White Sox fans, people like me, are still frustrated. We knew it was going to be bad. We didn't think it was going to be this bad. And also, we got veterans with minimum trade value, so we're watching guys that are just not going to be helping out. And my colleagues don't think the White Sox are even the worst team in baseball. So this is the recent power rankings, and the Sox came in at 28th. And this is the recent power rankings within Locked On MLB. The Rockies and the Marlins are considered worse. And the Marlins may be worse because they've already declared their season's over. They're already trading off their assets. So the race to the bottom might actually have some competition. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Before I go, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Also, the White Sox play the Tampa Bay Rays tonight at 5:50 p.m. Central. Sox hope to bounce back from last night's loss. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And we'll be back tomorrow. I'm going to roll out Way Back Wednesday. As every Wednesday, I'll dedicate a segment to talk about some of the great moments in Sox history, or what every guy loves to do. Talk about a random ball player in team history, especially random. Keyword, the guy that, some guy that maybe only got 3 seasons with the White Sox or 50 at bats. Those are the people that stick in your heart. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page at Locked On White Sox. Smash the like button and give a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. And let me know your thoughts on today's topics regarding Mike Clevinger's non-existent trade value, the foolish pursuit of trying to offload veterans in the trade market, and embracing bad having no reward. You can give me that feedback on Twitter at ToddJDub, or email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.